distant land, not too far away, but pretty far still. And not too long ago, an explorer by the name of Setonix ventured on an epic journey to find the ancient fabled trio of 1U modules. He ventured upon the highest peak of Mount Modularis, defeated the patch dragon, and descended into the cave which lay in front of him. He lit his torch and ventured on and on and on and on. I mean, it's a dark cave. What's he looking for? 3 little things. And I won't belabor the point, but he found them. And here they are. Sands of Time, Ancient Scroll, and Arcane Knowledge. The great 1U trio, brought to you by SetonixSynth.
Hello and welcome. Today, we'll be looking at not 1, but 3 modules from SetonixSynth. All 1U modules, the Sands of Time, Filter Noise Source, Ancient Scroll, Voltage Controlled Decay Envelope, and Arcane Knowledge, Vintage VCA Overdrive. First, I'll do a quick walkthrough of each of the 3 modules, then we'll circle back and do full demos and patch tips for each of the modules, and then we'll end it with some music. But just before that, I want to point out this little 1 HP 1U spacer I have in my rack here. They're available at Robots Are Red Etsy shop. It says Robots Are Red on one side, and negative space on the other side. They come in packs of 4, and I believe they're $4 plus some shipping at my Etsy shop, so go check it out. And with that, let's get started with a quick rundown of each module. First up, Sands of Time Filtered Noise Source. So this has 3 outputs: analog, logic, and filtered. Now the filter has a switch here to switch between analog, logic, and both. Now both, you could just hear a slight difference in the high end with noise. But other than that, you can't hear too much difference between logic and both. Let's switch to the analog for right now. The filter is a bandpass filter. So we get low pass effect to the left, high pass effect to the right, and you get your bandpass in the middle. Unfortunately, there's no CV control for the filter, but these work great for playing manually or patching into sequential switch or just multiple different destinations, using the logic for CV noise, all good options that we'll go into after we look at the next module, which is Ancient Scroll, the voltage controlled decay envelope. I don't think I mentioned before, these are all 10 HP, so they're really tiny, nice, compact, little, great utilities. Now the Ancient Scroll has a manual trigger, a decay time knob from very short to long, exponential. It has a CV input for the decay time, along with a trigger input. And that is Ancient Scroll. Now on to Arcane Knowledge, the Vintage VCA/Overdrive. Now with this, we have the audio out, obviously, and we have our audio in, and we have our gain or attenuation of our signal. And when we plug in CV, it doesn't cut that signal, it just takes full CV the whole time. So now when we give it an envelope, it fires like a normal VCA would. So now we can see the waveform going through. And we have this switch here, which goes from a normal VCA to an overdrive. Now, when I increase this, it adds some gain to the signal. We could see that it's changing up the waveform quite a bit, making it a little more pointy. So I could use it as an overdriven VCA, or we could just have this up and push it more and then just throw that into another VCA, and we have a nice, good, heavy drive that we could add to things. I mean, this is just a sine wave. So I'm changing the waveform on the oscillator going in, and here it is normally. So sine to a kind of weird ramp. With this, here we get quite a bit more harmonics added from that drive. And that is Arcane knowledge. Alright, now let's get a little more in depth with some patch tips and further demos. And we'll look at each of these all as a group rather than individually to make it make more sense. Because I mean, the decay envelope's going to be going into the VCA. So let's get going. Let's take a closer look now at Sands of Time and all the different noise colors we get, along with a little closer look at the logic out. Now the logic, I believe, is 6 different oscillators going through a logic function, and we're getting high and low gates. And I can't quite tell on the oscilloscope if we're getting any at 0 volts, but it looks like we might be getting some 0 volt steps. Now, since the noise is not repeating, the oscilloscope can't really get a good grip on it. But that will work great for CV modulation. Now let's take a closer look at the noise colors. Let's go to analog. So we start with the analog white noise. Turn the volume up a little bit. And remember, this is a bandpass filter. So I'll start at the lowest and go to the highest. I'm going to go through this nice and slow, so you'll get a nice relaxing colored noise relaxation tape for the next minute or so. That was pretty relaxing, huh? It's like hearing a storm coming in from the distance, and then at the end the cicadas came out. And now let's listen to the logic. Now I looked through the back and I didn't see any trimmers that affected the pitch of the logic, unfortunately, so you're stuck with this pitch unless you have something to repitch it, which would be fun to play with, and we'll look at that a little bit later. And now I'll go not quite as slow, but I'm going to go through the noise filter range for the logic noise. Definitely something a bit more ominous and not as relaxing, a bit more mechanical, industrial. But what if we filtered this through a low-pass filter now to get a little bit more of that hum and less of that upper logic noise going through? And then we can cut up. But that really nails in that logic noise, which we're trying to get rid of. Get a nice, good rumble from this. And now let's look at repitching this. Okay, so I'm having Sands of Time patch into beads here, and I'm turning it fully wet, and I have the grains about going to length, so it sounds pretty seamless. Now I can pitch up or down. Let's play with the filter. So, if you have beads, it's an easy way to do a pitch effect. Other way is if you have a sampler, you could just loop a sample of it going at random for a little bit and then adjust the speed of that or volt per octave or whatever. And obviously if you have a pitch shifter, I'm going to just play with this for a minute. All right, let's move on to something else. So what I have right now is just an oscillator going into Arcane knowledge and then the envelope coming from Ancient Scroll. But let's look at ways to play with that CV input on Ancient Scroll. Let's look at velocity on a keyboard. So now I could set the decay lower at the lowest level I want when I want just a little pluck. But then if I play harder, I obviously get a longer decay. So a way to get a little more expressive with the modules and a keyboard. And here it is with a little sequence with the velocity programmed in. Now another thing to look at is see how we have an exponential envelope, meaning it curves downward towards the destination very quickly. But what if we patched the output into the CV input? We're going to get a different shape. And I'm just multing this with a stackable cable here. And I'm going to turn this lower because it's getting fed back on itself with a high gate. So it's going to be pretty high to begin with. But it's going to turn our knob down at that exponential rate, giving us the opposite, a logarithmic curve. And now what if I can attenuate this signal with a Tidbit Audio little mini attenuator? I'm going to start at max, and we have logarithmic. I'm going to turn this up a little higher. But if I turn this down all the way, we're back to exponential. So you would think we could hit linear at a certain level. Yep. With a little attenuation, we get more of a linear envelope. So you could adjust the shapes with two little, very affordable accessories. Now let's look at a fun way to use all three of these modules together, in addition to a sequential switch and the marsupial filter, also by SetonixSynth. With this, I'm going to take the analog and logic outputs and patch those each into a side of marsupial. I'm going to take a bandpass out for one and a low pass out for one, give those LFO modulation, and then we'll obviously have the filtered noise going out into the sequential switch as well. And those will be switched on each hit going out to Arcane Knowledge VCA. I'm going to turn it to no drive, so it's just a regular VCA. We're getting the envelope from Ancient Scroll, and I'll also be patching an LFO into the Decay CV for Ancient Scroll. So first I'm going to take my trigger channel, which is a Euclidean sequence with an XOR from channel 2 Euclidean sequence, and this is channel 3. So I'm splitting that into the trigger on Ancient Scroll, and then also into the trigger on the sequential switch. I'm also patching a reset output into the reset in on the sequential switch, and I'm going to switch the sequential switch over to 3 because we're only going to be using 3 channels. So I'm going to plug the analog noise into this first channel of marsupial, and keeping the cable colors the same so you could trace it better between the cameras, I'm patching that into the first input, and we could hear it going through the filter. And now let's plug in the logic. As I mentioned before, we'll pull the low pass, and I have this in series and not parallel. I'm going to give it a trigger to get it over to the second. And then the filtered noise is going into the third input. And we can adjust to whatever we want, play it manually. I'm going to go, let's go somewhere a little lower, so it gives us a consistent lower frequency with this, and it's nothing too high or harsh all the time. Switch back to the first, close the VCA, and I'm going to plug my trigger back into my trigger output. It's also worth mentioning that I have the output plugged into a compressor off screen. Just simple, it's Autodyne by Steady State Fate with a medium amount of compression just to bring up the levels of the bass noise closer to the logic noise level. Let's just switch to the both. And quickly, let's look at it with the drive on Arcane Knowledge. That's it for this video. Now stay tuned for some music I put together using these 3 modules in every part of the patch.